Okay, hello and welcome everyone to the Q member webinar, where we'll update you and test the emerging plans for the future of Q. So we're absolutely delighted that you're joining us, and we're very much looking forward to hearing your reflections throughout the session. First things first, so please do type your name and say hello in the chat box. Thank you to all those who have done so already. I think there's a few of you who are just joining over the phone, so it might be a bit trickier for you to join in on the chat, but a collective hello to all of you. And whilst everyone's saying hello on the chat box, a few technical points. You should all have your microphones muted and your webcams disabled. That's just to reduce the background noise and to increase the connectivity on the call and ensure that hopefully it all runs smoothly. Inevitably with these things, there may be some technical issues, so please do flag them in the chat box and we'll check if it's an issue at our end. It may be that it is an issue at your end, in which case, as often with these things, the best option may be just to log off and log back in. But we do have someone on the chat function who will try and help you out. And please also note that the webinar will be recorded. So we also have our camera turned off. And again, this is just to increase the kind of connection speed. But you should be able to see our faces on the presentation at the moment. So I'm Matthew Hill. I'm the fairly new Insight and Evaluation Manager for Q. And I'll be introducing the webinar and running the polls. We'll also have Penny Pereira, the Q Program Director, who most of you will know. Penny will be presenting the bulk of the content, so I'll hand over to her shortly. And we also have Stacey Lally, the Head of Delivery at Q, and Sadie Constable, the Senior Communications and Stakeholder Manager for Q and Q Labs, who'll be running the chat function and potentially kind of chipping in throughout the webinar to reflect some of the discussions that are going on in the chat box. And finally, we're also joined by Charlotte, who's the new Chief Exec at National Voices, who will also be chipping in here and there throughout the webinar. Before I hand over to Penny, we have our first poll of the webinar, and this is really just to get us going and to make sure that the polling is working for everyone. So we're drawing inspiration from the animal kingdom, and we'd like to know what you think is the best collective noun for Q members from the below options. So obviously it's pretty light-hearted, but I guess it also gets at the different ways that we might think of Q or what it means to be a Q member. I'll launch the actual poll in a second, but just to go through the options. So we've got a wisdom of wombats, an exultation, as in larks, a murmuration of starlings, a conspiracy of ravens, an army of ants, or a family of beavers. So just bear with me 1 second while I launch the poll. Great, so you should all be able to see the poll now, so please make your choice. I'll give you about 30 seconds or so. And just while you're doing that, we'll be using polling throughout the webinar to take your kind of temperature on the content that Penny's presenting. The polls are really just a way of kind of getting a quick sense of your views, but we're really hoping that the polling questions will provoke more kind of detailed thoughts and questions in the chat function. So please do kind of type throughout the webinar and we'll try and get to your points. Okay, I'll give you another 10 seconds or so while we're just waiting for the last few votes to come in, and then I'll share the results. Okay, right, I'm about to share the results. Okay, so I think we've got a fairly clear winner, although from a small sample. It looks like not everyone's managed to vote, so please let us know if you are having an issue with the polling function. Otherwise, people may have just found it too difficult to choose. So the clear winner was a murmuration that got 4 votes. There was 2 votes for a family of beavers, 1 vote for an exultation, so we'll try and keep up the joy for the rest of the webinar. And actually, none of the others got any votes. Okay, but it looks like from a few of you have got working on the chat function. So we'll be coming back to various polls throughout the webinar once we've heard a bit more from Penny. Okay, good stuff. So I'll be piping up throughout the rest of the webinar, but now I'm going to hand over to Penny to take us through the main content.
Great, thanks a lot, Matt, and thanks to everyone who's been able to make this call. As Matt touched on, the main purpose of this call is to really test the proposals that we're going to be putting forward over the next few weeks for the next 10 years of Kew. So we've got to a relatively key point in what's been quite a long strategy process. There are a few things in this webinar that may be new to you. I've got a few emerging ideas that are kind of I can test with you, but I'm hoping that a lot of this should be reasonably consistent with again what you've been telling us and other things that you might have read about as we've been sharing how this process has been developing. So really we're hoping that this is a way in which we can kind of play back and check that we've been hearing the right things from you. And tell you, therefore, how we're planning on putting those forward in terms of the proposal. Obviously, this is quite a high-level strategic process. Anything that we then decide we want to be doing would go through the same kind of in-depth process of co-design and co-development with members as you normally see with Kew. I'm not going to give a lot of background or context for the process that we've been through. If you'd like to know more about that, then I did publish a blog kind of a bit earlier in the year, which explains a bit more about the process. I think we're going to include a link to that in the chat box so that you can see that if you'd like to know more. But very briefly, Kew has been around since 2015 when we ran our kind of initial co-design process. We got 5 years initial funding at that point, which means this is the stage at which we need to make a case for longer term funding. We hope to be going with a proposal that asks for a further 10 years funding from 2020 with a significant review process at 2025. So that's the kind of scope of the strategic process that we're going through at the moment. As part of this process, we're considering quite a wide range of different questions. So we need to make the strategic case for Kew to continue and to consider if the vision is right. It's obviously always more that we feel we can do to build the story of how Kew makes a difference. But I'm really pleased to say that the conversation we've been having with stakeholders suggests that there's really strong support for Kew and the unique role that it can play in supporting collaborative learning and improvement across the UK. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that strategic case and vision for Kew today. I'm going to focus on these blue boxes, which is where we're looking at how the community should grow in future, how Kew should connect to the health and care system of which it's part, and what are the sorts of things that Kew should offer. I've also included along the bottom there some of the more back office aspects of Kew that are a really important part of what we're considering at this moment. So things like infrastructure, funding, governance, evaluation, say important stuff, very happy to share more if people are interested, but in the interest of time, we aren't planning on covering those today. So as you'll see from the slides, this process is quite strategic relative to a lot of the conversations that we kind of tend to bring to you at as members, and the slides are inevitably quite high level. But I did just want to include this slide, which just shares some of the quotes that we've been pulling together as part of developing the proposal. It's been one of the really kind of gratifying, nice bits of the process that we've had an opportunity to pull together many comments of why people think that Kew is useful. So I wanted to just include a couple of those at this point, just to make sure that we pause, reflect on why we're doing this, and also to make it clear that when you do share with us what you think about what's working with Kew and equally what's not, that does then feed through to the decision-making process that we have. Okay, so in terms of the actual proposals, I've got 4 slides relating to the 3 dark blue boxes on the slide that I just shared. I'm going to try and keep this very brief, so I'm going to talk through 1 or 2 slides, and then we're going to stop for a polling question, and then I'm going to invite kind of discussion. So you can pose comments all the way through in the chat box, and we probably won't invite people to contribute comments verbally, but we'll be looking at the chat box and responding to those questions as they come through. Okay, so the first couple of slides, let's start with growing the community, because there's quite a lot in the proposal about this. So members tell us that they want Q to reach many people. Indeed, we suspect you're telling people positive things about being a member, because we seem to see we've got 10 to 20 new people joining each week, which is fantastic. We're proposing that we should aim to grow Q to at least 10,000 members by 2030. Indeed, there's been quite a lot of discussion about whether that's ambitious enough, so it'd be really good to hear your thoughts. Positive news of Q has been spreading south of the border in Ireland, so I'm pleased to say that we're expecting to be able to expand Q into the Republic of Ireland. We don't think any wider international expansion of membership is a priority for Q at the moment, though we are thinking about how we can make sure we build strong links so that Q benefits from kind of global perspectives. On the last webinar that we heard, members told us that there were particular groups that it was important to make sure that we have within Q. This is something that stakeholders have told us too. So the draft proposal says that we're going to focus on those in social care, those leading digital change, and those who are involved in work across local health and care systems. Highlighting those particular groups because they were seen as particularly important to the future health and care improvement agenda. We also know that there's a lot of passion in Q for meaningful involvement of patients and carers within improvement, and indeed that co-production should be a really key theme when thinking about the future of health and care and therefore improvement. I wonder, Charlotte, would you like to say a couple of words now about the conversations we've been having in this area?
Great, thank you. So my name's Charlotte. I am the new Chief Executive of National Voices. And I'm really pleased with the conversations Penny and her colleagues and her team and I have been having about where we could go together. So Penny has been telling me how keen so many of you are on understanding better and working harder to include service users and patients and carers and families in improvement efforts. And we're obviously really heartened by that commitment to using patient experience as a sort of foundation stone to make change in health and care work. Now, the same is true on my side of the fence, if you want to call it that. There's an awful lot of patients and families who, on the basis of the experiences they've had in using health and care, and these might be good experiences or bad experiences, have a real passion and a very strong intrinsic motivation to help make health and care better for other people. And we feel we're not always using that energy well enough, and we're not always supporting people with that intrinsic motivation in the way we should. And we're not placing people in the way of really strategic opportunities to make their voices heard and to make a difference where it matters. So we think by pooling our thinking and our practice and our insight that we between us have, the Health Foundation with Q and National Voices with its member network of 160 charities in health and care, we could really go places with this initial idea that if we bring together people who are trying to improve health and care from professional and managerial backgrounds and people who are trying to improve health and care because they are service users, we could make a real difference. And we haven't taken it much further than that in terms of detail, because it's very clear that we need to work, National Voices need to work with our members and with existing patient advocates and patient activists. And clearly the Health Foundation and Q needs to work with all of you and all the members on that side. And so today is really just about saying exciting stuff will happen, and please help us make it as good as it can be.
Thank you. So again, really interested to know if anyone on the call would like to know more about that, or be interested to hear what you think. So as I say, assuming that the proposal goes through in July, then we would be starting a kind of 9-month consultation process later in the co-design process later in the year to think about what that would look like. Finally, in terms of growing the community, we know that having a selection process at all is still contentious with some. At the same time, we also know that being a Q member means something, and we think that that's linked to needing to demonstrate some level of experience and commitment. So as part of this kind of proposal for the future, we're not planning on revisiting having a selection process for Q, but we do think that we can and should start to see if we can change the debate a bit about queue being unhelpfully exclusive. So, I mean, at present, there are many ways in which people who are not members can benefit from queue. So queue labs, queue exchange, groups, many activities have lots of ways in which people can participate, whether or not they're a member. So we're proposing to do more to promote and develop the opportunities to participate. What we're currently calling this open queue offers, although I suspect that will change. If you've got a better way of describing it, please let us know. Really what we're trying to get to is that a core part of queue's mission and theory of change is that the community should connect with the many thousands of others active in improvement, and we think we can put a bit more emphasis on this going forward. So I've said quite a bit about growing the community, and that is seen as a kind of key indicator of the appeal and the value of queue by a lot of people that we speak to. But I think it's worth playing back that for many members, actually engagement is just as important, and they certainly don't want growth to come at the expense of queue members being able to find the people and support that they need as part of queue. So there are a number of things that our design work suggests will be most helpful to support engagement as the community grows. So as you'll know from the research and other activity, evaluation activity that you participate in, we put a lot of weight on trying to understand members, your priorities. We want to think about how we can kind of refine and develop that further, so that we're making sure that we're really understanding kind of members and the priorities. We think we can do a bit more to surface the stories and the insights that are coming out through the community to inspire and encourage others to share and to show what's happening within queue to the wider world. We think there's further work to be done around queue's digital infrastructure. If we're planning a 10-year strategy, that gives us a real opportunity to think about creating a digital environment for queue that is really consistently meeting the needs of members. We also know that the people who are particularly active as leaders within queue, so those might be leaders of special interest groups, our connectors, the conveners that we had as part of the pilot we had. There are many people who are kind of really helping to lead and connect the community. At the moment, we don't do that much to kind of recognise and support those people. We think that should be a more significant part of our future strategy. And I mentioned groups there. As the community grows, it's going to be more and more important that people can connect with groups that are focused on particular kind of topics and areas of priority for them. So we're thinking about how we can do more to support groups within the community. So that's what I wanted to say about growing the community and supporting its engagement. I'm going to hand back to Matt now for the next poll.
Great, thanks, Penny. So you may have kind of questions and comments for the content that Penny's presented so far. So please do kind of type them into the chat box. We will come back to them after this second poll. So this second poll really relates to the ambitious plans that Penny set out for growing queue. And what we really want to know from you is what's your priority for growing queue? So I guess there's the three options taken from that slide a couple of slides ago. So the first one is around promoting queue to reach key areas, so new areas of health and care, such as social care and those working in digital change. The second potential priority would be to do more to involve service users and carers, I guess related to some of the thoughts that Charlotte set out about patient engagement and co-design and co-production. And then thirdly, developing and promoting the open queue offers so that anyone can access that Penny mentioned as well. So they're the options. Just bear with me for a few seconds while I launch the poll. Great, that should be up on your screen now. So I'll give you 30 seconds or so to have a think about that. You know, we should stress that as Penny set out, you know, the aim is to pursue all of these areas, but we just really want to get a sense from you kind of what the key priorities are. And please do chip in on the chat function if you've got any more kind of content or questions to add around the poll choice.
I don't know whether the group of people who are joining us from Birmingham, if you're able to do a show of hands or something in the room and pop it in the chat box, we can make sure we share that back with the group.
Okay, that looks fairly settled now, so I'll close it in a couple of seconds. Great, so I'm going to share the results now, so they should be up on everyone's screen. For those who can't see it, the first option, to promote Kew to reach key areas such as social care and those working in digital change, just had one vote. One vote for do more to involve service users and carers. But the clear winner with 5 votes was develop and promote the open Kew offers that anyone can access. So Penny's, I guess, already outlined some of the content around our plans there. I guess there'll be a challenge in getting that right balance between, you know, broadening the inclusiveness and accessibility of Kew, whilst also obviously staying true to its kind of core purpose. Sadie and Stacey, I don't know if there's been any input on the chat function around that.
About what the open Kew idea meant and it linking into reaching much wider than we do at the moment. So the answer to that was yes, but we need to think about how we do that. And David has just chipped in, see good to hear plans to engage other sectors, and that open Kew is an important area, so agrees that it's right, you know, getting the balance right between size and nurturing existing membership is really important as well. So that's definitely something that we're keeping front of mind here. And then Christine has just mentioned about the NHS app coming next year. Program to support service users will most likely involve service users and carers as well. So more coming on that.
Yes, thank you for the comment about the number of people involved in polling. Just to be clear, as Matt said at the start, the point of the polling is really just to provoke a bit of kind of discussion, you know, have a way to kind of start the discussion. As I say, technical problems or indecision seems to be limiting the number of people who are voting relative to the number of people who are registered as participating in the call. Yeah, and to be clear, we won't be making decisions based on the vote that's here. I wonder whether we should respond to Jane's comment here, very interesting, around being inclusive and open isn't counter to Kew's core purpose. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, that's why I feel like sometimes the debate about whether we should have selection criteria or not for Kew sometimes misses the point a little bit, in that I think what we expect is that everybody who's joining Kew joins with a kind of mission and expectation that Kew is here not just for the members but for the wider health and care system, and you know, both Kew's offers and the way in which we encourage the community to act is in a way that is then inclusive and involving of others.
Great, okay, well I think we'll move on to the next area, but please keep chipping in on the chat function. We'll have a bit of time later on in the webinar to respond to further comments. Okay, I'll hand back to you, Penny.
Great, okay, so I'm going to say a little bit now about the way that Kew is connected to the wider health and care system. Kew isn't just a kind of project, but it's, the idea is that it's an intervention woven into the system of which it's part. So a key dimension to the strategy process that we've been through is really thinking about how Kew can support and meet the needs of the health and care system. The first point on that is that our partnerships nationally and regionally have felt really valuable to Kew and the Health Foundation, and I think also to our partner organisations. So we did make a decision early on in this process that that would continue to be a core part of the way that Kew operated, and we've got some plans for how we can further develop the partnership model over the years ahead. Then thinking about, again, our original kind of theory of change, the idea was that Q would not just benefit members, but actually over time start to influence the context within which improvement happens. And we hear from members quite often that they would like to see us doing more, especially as we get larger, being a bit bolder in terms of actually starting to kind of change the way in which improvement happens more widely across the system. So the main new and additional thing that you will see as part of the future proposals for Q is a kind of membership offer for organisations that are leading change at national and regional level, helping those organisations who are responsible for that kind of change across the UK to learn from each other, and also to learn from the insight of the Q community about what's actually going to be most useful in practice. So this is a new, it'll be relatively small initially in terms of kind of scale, but that will be something that we'll be scoping and launching in 2020, assuming we get approval. Say a key part of that new offer is thinking about the kind of collective insight that Q community members have about actually what does it take to really deliver change effectively. So besides that particular offer for those organisations, we are also thinking about how we could do a number of kind of insight projects a year, which would help us kind of all learn from what we know about how to make change happen. And then finally, we're thinking about how Q can demonstrate that it is actually contributing to the big shared strategic priorities for the system. So Q is set up first and foremost to help Q members to deliver on their existing improvement work, and that will continue to be a core part of what we're doing. But from the start, we have also thought that there was opportunity to do some more focused work on shared challenges. So that's the sort of ethos and the theory behind Q Lab, and with Q Exchange being thematically focused this time, that's the same idea coming through there. So looking forward, we're thinking about how we can boost the way in which Q Lab and Q Exchange makes a contribution to system priorities, and by linking up Q Lab, Q Exchange and other work that we do within Q, we're hoping to show that we can have a kind of significant cumulative impact on some key priority areas. If we can address sort of central priorities for health and care, that's also likely to impact on the extent to which local providers, local health systems see Q as a priority. As part of this project, we've been interviewing 15, 16 or so executives of local providers, local health systems, to see how Q might be able to better dock with their work, their structures. We've been really drawing on those places that already have a significant group of 20 plus members in their particular organisational area. So I can share more about that in the kind of weeks and months ahead, but we're thinking that if we can give a bit more attention to how we make sure that we communicate the way that Q is supporting the priorities of employing organisations, and if we can make it a bit more visible the way in which Q can be supported and develop at a local level, that will mean in turn that members get more support and time to participate in Q, which our evaluation findings suggest that is a real kind of key constraint at the moment for members. So back over to Matt now.
Great, thanks very much, Penny. So we've got our third poll relating to the content that Penny's just outlined around our plans for connecting to the health and care system. And again, we really just want to take the temperature in terms of what you see as the priorities in this area. So the three options are to do more focused work on kind of priority topics, whether it's those outlined in the long-term plan in England or other kind of national level priorities. Do more to positively shape the national and regional context for improvement work. I guess especially that work around developing the new offer and the partner model, focused on those who are focused on improvement at the national and regional level. And finally, to increase the visibility and recognition of Q in local organisations and systems. So I guess that's both from Q centrally, but also supporting Q members to actually increase that visibility and recognition. Okay, I'm going to launch the poll now. Great, so please do vote away. That should be up on your screen now. For those who are having trouble kind of engaging with the poll, again, please do feed in on the chat function and do feed in with any additional kind of thoughts that people may have. Great, so we've got a little bit more time for a few more votes to come through. We've only had a small handful so far. Don't think about it too hard. And again, I think it is important to stress what Penny was saying previously about the polling. This is really just a way of getting a bit of engagement in the webinar. Okay, so I'm going to end the voting now. We've just had 6 votes, but I will read out the results, especially for those who are joining via the phone. I'll just publish those now. So out of the 3 options, we had 3 votes for do more to positively shape the national and regional context for improvement work, and 3 for increasing the visibility and recognition of Q in local organisations and systems. On that 3rd point, I know that is something that the current external evaluation undertaken by RAND is focusing on. They're really trying to get into a deeper dive around how kind of Q, understanding how Q kind of plays out within local organisations and systems. Okay, so was there anything that you want to say around that, Penny, or was there anything that's been coming through on the chat function, Sadie or Stacey, before moving on to the next section?
I think it's worth mentioning some of the comments around developing the collective insight of the community, so both from Emma and David, and one particular focus on Q Exchange being a mechanism for doing that, so both demonstrating the impact across the system through having the right kind of funding mechanisms in place. So I think that's really helpful. And Emma's point around that funding actually going quite a long way into enabling that to happen. That's the benefit of the kind of infrastructure that we have through Q. So that's some helpful points there. And I think it also links to both what might be happening in local organisations, but also the opportunity for linking that to some of the national priorities as well, in terms of the influence that Q might have.
Yes, we were pretty pleased, I think, that our first Q Insight survey around issues in kind of outpatients, we were able to close the survey on the Wednesday, and then by the Thursday we were using the results to put a question to Simon Stevens, which I think was quite a nice example of some of the way in which actually the genuinely interesting stuff that came through from the community allowed us to make a bit more visible what people who are involved in improvement think is important to people with influence within the wider system.
Great. Okay, I think we'll crack on with the final section, Penny.
Okay, so this final slide is wrapping up all our Q activities, resources, Q Lab, Q Exchange. So it's covering a lot of ground, but that's really because actually what we've been hearing is that the offers that we currently have in place for through Q are going down really well. So our member survey, for example, asked you which offers you find most valuable, and all of them went down well in different ways. What we're hearing is that people like the flexibility, the fact that from the start we have designed Q knowing that the people involved in improvement come from very diverse backgrounds, they have diverse learning needs. And so we think that the right thing to do is to continue to provide a range of interactive development and networking opportunities, focusing particularly on what does it take to be effective at collaborative learning and improvement, and really doing as much as we can to leverage the kind of peer learning and support that's such a particular feature of Q. In relation to the lab and Q Exchange, again, some things already coming through in the chat box on that. Again, the evaluation feedback is really positive around the experience and the value that Q Lab and Q Exchange offers, and so there's appetite to do more on that. In relation to the lab, we are looking at a kind of evolved and expanded range of ways in which the lab will operate, you know, it's really exciting that we look like we'll be able to launch a lab in Wales again from 2020, and we're hoping that that may then be able to be followed by a lab in Scotland a bit further down the line. In relation to Q Exchange, we're planning to continue that on a kind of annual basis with a more significant review of the model by 2025. But if we continue to have some kind of funding for collaborative change projects, we might have kind of over 200 by 2030, which I think just gives you a sense of the way in which Q could help to support work which doesn't naturally get funded through other routes. Okay, so my last couple of slides is really just to try and wrap up and summarise how the plans for Q will evolve. So this is the image that some of you may recognise from our learning report about how Q looks now. So with the community and the core connecting platform, and then on top of that, if you can imagine it 3D, our activities and resources, Q Lab and Q Exchange. So if we flip on, this is what we're proposing for the next phase. So as you'll see, there's quite a lot of continuity, which we're hoping you'll be happy with. But you may also see that what we're planning for the future is bigger in three key ways. So bigger in terms of the community growing in size and into new areas, and the volume of activity getting bigger in terms of further labs, number of Q Exchange projects, and the ambitions for groups expanding. I think it's also bigger in terms of the level at which we think Q makes a difference. So while in the first few years of Q, we've deliberately focused on making sure Q provides great resources and support for members, when we were designing Q, members were really clear they also wanted us to together positively influence how the system as a whole operates when it comes to learning and improvement. So when we look ahead, what we're saying is that we'll start to be more explicit and ambitious about supporting wider system change. Of course, in large part, that's going to be through continuing to support thousands of people to learn, share and collaborate, so that on a cumulative basis, that starts to shift culture. But it will also be through some of the more direct ways in which that we've mentioned on this webinar, in terms of the new offer for national and regional organisations, and through the kind of collective insight work. Finally, we're planning for Q to be bigger in terms of impact. So you'll see we've added an additional circle linking the different elements of Q. This is just intended to signal that we now feel that we've got each of the component parts of Q in a pretty good place. And so in the next phase, we can concentrate a bit more on having bigger impact by connecting work in different areas. So I just want to end my bit by making all of this a little bit more tangible with an example of the sorts of things that we might increasingly do in future. So I'm hoping none of you will have missed the fact that Q Exchange opened for members to post ideas this week, and that one of the two themes is understanding alternatives to traditional models of outpatients. I'm also hoping some of you were amongst the 300 odd Q members who shared your thoughts on the challenges and opportunities in outpatients in our first Q Insight survey that I mentioned just now. And you may also have read the most recent Q Lab essays, which, together with the essays that came out from the first lab project, hold rich insights on all sorts of things, including having implications for how outpatient care is delivered. Some of you might have joined the online group that we've set up to convene the people who are doing work in this area. We've also just confirmed the date of this year's community event, so the 13th of November, if you haven't got it in your diary already. What we're hoping is, by the time we get to November, we'll have all of the energy and the insight from the survey activity, Q Exchange, relevant bits from Q Labs, and we'll be holding a session on outpatients as part of the event. So roll forward to 2020, we'll have 10 live Q Exchange projects on outpatients, and many other ideas will have connected and supported as part of the Q exchange process. And we'll have probably a Q visit, other resources and activities which will feed back and make available to the wider community what we're learning around this kind of particular topic. So that, just taking outpatients as an example, what you'll see is Q becoming a kind of hive of knowledge and activity in kind of key strategic priority areas for the UK as a whole. So I'm going to hand back over to Matt in a moment for the final poll and the set of questions which we're hoping it will prompt from you. I'm hoping that's given you a bit of a sense of where we think Q is going, based on primarily what we're hearing from you and also from other stakeholders. I'm hoping that through the remainder of this webinar, but more importantly, over the weeks ahead, you'll help us to continue to make sure we're getting this right. So please don't hold back.
Great, thanks very much, Penny. So the final poll is really trying to get the overall temperature for how you're kind of feeling about the proposals. Please, as I keep saying, do keep kind of chipping in with kind of comments to the chat box. There'll be a little bit of time after this poll to return to those. But like I say, we just want to get this kind of overall snapshot of how people are feeling. So overall, how supportive or unsupportive are you of the proposals for future Q? I know you've just heard a fairly brief introduction from Penny today, although I know that some of you have been a bit more actively involved in the proposals today. So I will launch the final poll, and obviously we're slightly putting ourselves out there, so do be honest, do respect that by being honest. Okay, great. So the poll is live now, and like I say, it'd be really interesting to hear people kind of, I guess, back up there and explain their response. You know, so if there are particular things that you're very supportive of, that you're really pleased to have seen in the proposal, then please do highlight that in the chat. Equally, if there are things that maybe you're not sure about, or that maybe have jarred slightly, or you were hoping or expecting to see that aren't there, then please do kind of let us know. Okay, I'll just leave this final poll open for a little bit longer because we're still waiting for a few more votes to come in. It is all quite positive so far, so chip in if you're not.
I'm sure that is influencing.
Yeah, from a very small sample, and obviously we're factoring in your politeness as well. Okay, we'll end the poll there, and hopefully it can provoke a bit more chat. So overall, the people who chipped in were, out of the 5 that took part in the poll, 4 were very supportive and 1 was kind of somewhat supportive. So we'll take that as a positive, but not base too much on it given the sample size. Okay, so has there been anything on the chat function that's come in around that, anything more specific or anything on the overall proposals? I know the polls have been fairly tightly focused, so there may be broader reflections that people want to kind of chip in.
There's some reflections on experience of joining Q and what happens locally. Noting that what happens locally can be a bit mixed, and we're aiming to improve that.
I think a link to that is there's a common thread about making those links and connections that are both through local groups and the kind of local footprints you might have as part of the Q. So that's not, it's kind of beyond your kind of welcome to the community. And Emma was suggesting how we might do some of that in the very early stages. So there's a kind of theme there for me around local connections, which might be before people apply to Q or just through some of those local groups as well. So that's a really helpful. Some of it's a process point, but it's really helpful.
I wonder whether I'll kind of respond to Jane's comment about a membership offer if this means pay to access. She says, my experience in other similar organisations has tended to push offers down traditional routes as these please more offers attracted more cash. I think just to clarify, the only area in which we're talking about directly charging for participation is the new offer for organisations working at kind of national and regional levels. And there that's a kind of deliberate strategy, recognising these are kind of significant and well-funded organisations with a responsibility for for system improvement. And we actually think making a small charge to those organisations to participate will be a driver of engagement. We did, as part of the Future Q process, look at whether we should consider charging members to join Q or look at charging for particular activities. And this was something that we spent some time on at the workshop that we pulled together back in February. I won't say it's always going to be off the table, but at the moment our primary strategy is to look to the Health Foundation and to our country partners to provide kind of long-term funding. It may be that we experiment with seeing what it's like to charge for some individual activities over the years ahead, but that's not really a primary objective or strategy for us at the moment. And certainly if we were to go down that route, we would come back and do further testing work with members.
Charlotte's raised her hand, so I'll hand over to Charlotte.
Hi, Charlotte again from National Voices. Just briefly to say, it's been really engaging to listen to your thinking, and I've learned a lot about where you're going to take Q next. Just to sort of maybe follow up on the illustration Penny used about outpatients and how you're hoping by bringing together all your various investments and initiatives to sort of leverage much larger impact. And I just want to sort of throw in that I think if we systematize and are much more strategic and ambitious about bringing people's lived experiences into these ambitions, we will go much further faster. So if we find a way of really strategically plugging in what people who use outpatient services find when they're using them, what's it like to wait, what's it like on the transactional level to book an appointment or change an appointment, what's it like to be giving an appointment when your doctor doesn't have all the test results in front of them and they've wasted your time? What's it like when you get charged huge amounts for parking and you can't find where you need to go? And maybe most importantly, what's it like if your appointment doesn't actually help you to understand your condition better and how you can live better with it in between appointments? So does your appointment actually create health or not? So I think looking at these things from a user perspective will really unlock a lot of strategic impact. And that's why we're so excited to have come on board. And that's why, you know, I'm so optimistic that our collaboration will make a real difference for the impact you can all have together.
If I just basically, I'll just come in with looking at one of the questions on the chat box. So Emma, you've made a helpful point. So I might pose this to Penny actually. So as Q grows, Emma was saying there's some real opportunities for the partner organisations to interact more with the community as it develops its own work, and to go some specifics there around approaches to regulation or performance, for example. How can we best test some of those ideas out with the community as a collective? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think when kind of mentioned the offer for national and regional organisations, we do see that as a core part of what that offer would be. So again, Matt may want to chip in because he'll be kind of leading the scoping on this, but looking at whether we can, that group of organisations that have major responsibility for that sort of system work could kind of sponsor key bits of insight gathering from the Q community. I should say that our early indication is that all of Q's current country partners are very interested in being participants in that offer. We may also open it up to other organisations that are operating at kind of national and regional level. But yeah, as you say, Emma, finding different ways in which we can make it easier for the community to kind of influence and share the kind of ideas to make work at that level more effective. That's a core part of what our ambition is.
Great, thanks, Penny. Okay, so we've just got a few minutes left. So there's just the last opportunity really to throw in any broader kind of comments or questions. So please do chip in if there are any. And just while Sadie and Stacey are looking through those, I guess just to say that, you know, this has been one of a few different mechanisms for engaging members. Obviously, we're at the stage of developing the Future Q proposals at the moment. I think the plan is that, you know, as some of that scoping work and design is developed, that there'll be more kind of substantial engagement with members, particularly around kind of specific areas. Okay, so it sounds like, yeah, there's not much more coming through, so that's great. So I guess that just leaves us to thank everyone for joining the webinar and taking the time out of your day to kind of engage with the proposals. It's been really useful to get that engagement, particularly through the chat function. And like I say, as the proposals develop over the next few months, obviously we'll be keeping you updated on how that progresses. So thanks very much for joining, and thanks to Penny, Stacey, Charlotte and Sadie as well.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye.